fliko.
For people who play sports, it's the same whenever you have an athlete who's gone to the league, who grew up where you grew up. It just feels like more possible. You're like, oh, wow. They were going to the same water fountain. They were going to the same high school. They were on the same basketball court, whatever it was. It's similar with music. Whenever there's nobody ever from where you're from who looks like you or whatever it is, who has made it doing the thing you want to do, sometimes it's like it's hard to picture it. And that makes people wonder if it's possible. But I'll tell you this. I'm sure for any of you, if you're making good music, it's possible no matter what. Even if it's not something that's happened where you're from. And I will also say this. Let's use it like a graph. I wish I could just draw a graph super fast that would illustrate this. Let's think of it this way. If you're at this level as a producer or as an artist or as a songwriter or an engineer or whatever it is that you do, let's say you're at this level right here. And by the way, sometimes people who don't exactly know what they're doing make legendary stuff and break all the rules. So this is just to try to illustrate my point. But let's say you're pretty new to this and you're trying to get into a certain industry, or you're trying to leave the city or the place you grew up in that doesn't have your industry or doesn't have your genre of music or doesn't have a place for you to grow with what you want to do for a career because there's no studios or there's just nothing like that where you're from. Do you have to leave to get that experience or to make that career happen? Do you have to go to another city? And here's what I think. I think if your product, whatever it is, if it's music or otherwise, and if it's really strong, people will come to you. And that's how you hear about artists, like even some of my favorite artists who are from a place that you've never heard of besides when you heard of that artist. No offense to anyone from Northampton, but like before Slow Tie, you don't really hear people talking about that place. Like besides a couple, you know what I mean? Before Aphex Twin, I never thought about Cornwall. You know what I mean? Like before J. Paul, you never thought about Rainer's Lane as like the hot music scene in London. Maybe it was Camden at the time when Amy Winehouse was doing her thing, or maybe it was Shoreditch or something. You know what I mean? Like sometimes where you're from can become the place, or it can become a place that people talk about if your music's that thing and you're doing it from a place that no one else is doing it from. That is interesting. That is almost a hook in a way. That makes it interesting as a story to people to say, oh, wow, this is another reason to champion this, beyond the fact that it's unique, beyond the fact that I like it just off the merit of it's good. It's from somewhere where no one else is doing it. When someone comes from a city, even in America, that doesn't have a million people coming out from that city, or maybe no one in their genre. What I was saying is, I think that moving to a city, if you're learning to grow or you're learning to get better at what you're doing because you feel like you can't get better, you can't make what you want to make where you're at, I think that's a valid reason. I think moving because you think it'll make what you're doing that you're already very proud of go off more or do better, I think that's more arguable. I think sometimes being from where you're from for as long as you can be, there's strength in that. Especially when you get to New York, you get to LA, you get to Atlanta, you get to Chicago, you get to these cities, Nashville, major hubs for music or creativity or business, and everybody from everywhere had that idea that you had. Let me go to where all the music, all the labels are, all the artists are, blah, blah, blah. That's why everybody goes to LA. That's why whenever you live in LA, it's not rude when you talk to someone you've never talked to before to say, hey, are you in LA at all this year? Because everybody comes through there at one point or another. If you get a contract from anything to do with fashion, music, whatever, maybe fashion's more European, who knows. But when it comes to music, LA is the hub. It's worldwide. And everyone's going to move there. So putting your city on the map, if you're making music you're proud of, if you're making music and you don't feel like where you're from is holding back what you're making, I'd say try to put your city on your back. And there's so much strength in that because you're the one. And if everybody in your city can start to understand it and start to see what you're doing and that you're making noise, they're going to get behind you. And that's a whole different kind of power. It's the same thing with being a young producer or any kind of producer, and having a song with the biggest artists in the game or having the first big song with a new artist. There's a complete different kind of power in breaking an artist than there is in someone who's already proved they can have hits just having another hit. You know what I mean? When Mike Will has a hit with Drake or Rick Ross or Future early in his career, that's one thing. He became a super producer because he's producing big songs for big artists. But whenever Mike Will broke Ray Sremmurd, and did No Flex Zone and did No Type and did these kinds of things, it created a whole different thing. Mike's someone who has been a mentor to me and taught me a lot, has been a friend to me ever since the first day I ever met that guy. Always been the homie to me, especially when me and Key were dropping. He was always there for everything, always making sure we were good. There's times I was hanging out with Mike where I left and I almost felt like I was cheating because I was like, oh, he shouldn't have told me that. Like, oh my God, he just gave me so much game. I don't even think he knows. He's like, oh my whole career is going to change now that I know what he just said. Like that kind of thing. And then I would think about it days later and I'd be like, of course he knows. Like, he's doing that to help me out. You know what I mean? I felt like there was times where Mike gave me game that the next day I was either making beats different or handling sessions different or doing things different. So there's something to be said for going where everything else is and competing. And then there's something to be said for standing on your own island and starting something new. Whether you're a producer and you're working with a brand new artist who's never had a big song or who's never been commercially successful and you grow with them, there's almost more, I would say, power in that at the end of the day and what you're going to be able to command when it comes to the deals you're doing and where you're going to be able to go with it than whenever you just do a song for somebody who's had a ton of hits. Because that person who's had a ton of hits has proven they can do it with or without you, and you're just on one of them. You know, whenever you do it for the first time with somebody, it means something different. So same advice I would give you if you're from a city that's never popped off before. If you are the first person who really goes crazy with your type of music or just with music in general from your city and everybody gets behind that, that's a different type of power that most people will never experience. If you become the hottest thing in LA this month, there's the hottest thing. Last month, next month, for the next 10 years, for the last 50 years. You know what I mean? So there's strength in the hard work that it takes to do the thing that no one else has ever done. But at the same time, if you want to get to it quicker, I respect that also. Just put the work in, and be ready to compete. I hope that helped. I hope that made sense.